Well, welcome back to session 6 of the Reading the Bible Like an Ancient series. This talk is on the topic of rest. And I'm going to kick it off with, have you ever wondered why Jesus goes after the Pharisees over Sabbath over and over and over again? Like, whoa! Let's give 2 examples. Matthew 11. Well, actually, Matthew 11 isn't the Pharisees, but it's an example of Jesus' use of rest. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Oh, doesn't that sound wonderful? John chapter 5. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath, the day you're not allowed to lift even a coffee cup up above elbow height. But Jesus answered them, my Father's still working, and also I'm working. For this reason the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but he was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God. Now, have you ever heard people just kind of ignoring this to try and reconcile what rest may have meant in Genesis, the early chapters of Genesis? God rests, and it never says he starts working again. But here Jesus is saying, he's still working. He's always been working. I'm working. It's a bit of conundrum there. And people have tried to reconcile the ideas. But for the most part, they don't enter into what the ancients understood by that word rest. Psalm 62. Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. Rest. It's a deceptively simple word, but in the ancient world it is incredibly complex, actually. And it's important that we get a handle on Israel's very particular view of rest. In general, through this series, I'm trying to just introduce ideas, ancient ideas to you, comparing Israel and the nations around it. I've also tried to leave alone how some of these ideas, these imageries, these symbolisms, these metaphors, fit into the larger narrative of the Bible. And I've done that because that's more than my pay grade, which is zip. But in this talk, I actually want to try and fit this topic into the grand narrative because it's such an important and underdeveloped concept. And I think it's worth doing partly because of how important Jesus makes Sabbath, in a reverse kind of way to the way the Pharisees had made it. It's still important to Jesus, even though he kind of baits them over it. However, if you pick up any book of biblical theology or biblical thinking and it has rest in it, It basically uses a 21st century idea of rest. Take the day off, put your feet up, enjoy resting, take a nap. And isn't that a good thing? We live in a fast-paced, chaotic kind of world. We feel there's all this pressure on us, the work. We need time off. Not a bad thing. But I don't think that's the ancient world. For starters, and I came across this idea as a teenager reading a book about the earth moving and construction industry in the early 20th century. Taking a day off is an economic risk. If you're moving a lot of dirt around and it starts to rain, you're in trouble. Work stops. So you can't afford to take a day off. You've got to work every day you can to get the job done as quickly as you can. Time is money, as they say. But there are big environmental risks that you've got no control over. In the ancient world, crops need to be planted. They need to be harvested. Taking one day off in 7. Wow, that's a lot of time. I think our problem here is we need bifocal kind of vision. Bifocal may not be quite the right imagery, but so we need to know what rest means from God's perspective. And we need to know what rest means from a human perspective, our attitude towards God. So from Yahweh's perspective, Psalm 132, for the Lord has chosen Zion, another name for Jerusalem. He has desired it for his dwelling, saying, this is my resting place, forever and ever. Here I will sit enthroned, for I have desired it. So resting doesn't mean dead. This is my place where I'm going to die forever and ever. No, here I will sit enthroned. Rest and enthronement go together. You can look up 1 Chronicles 28, Isaiah 66, 2 Chronicles 6. I know it's funny language, but gods rest in temples. That's what they do. So in the early chapters of Genesis, where it says, and on the 7th day God rested, that's because his work was done. He's now moving into a different phase of work, a different category of work. We'll come back to that. Is he dwelling inside the temple? Well, he's dwelling inside the mega temple. But, listen to Solomon on the day of inauguration, talking about the temple. This temple he's going to build. But will God really dwell on earth with humans? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple that I have built? Yet, Lord, my God, give attention to your servant's prayer and hear his plea for mercy. Hear the cry and the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence. May your eyes be open towards this temple day and night, this place which you said you would put your name here. May you hear the prayer of your servant, praise towards this place. Hear the supplications of your servant and of your people Israel, when they pray towards this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place. When you hear, forgive. Now there's some interesting questions in there. Will God really dwell on earth with humans? Well, yes, he does. The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. Well, yes, that's true. We know that. Hear from heaven your dwelling place. Heaven is the throne room. That's the imagery. It is Yahweh's dwelling place. It is his space. And we ain't going there. maybe this imagery might help. You've got a block of land, you want to build a house. It's empty. So you bring to the piece of land, truckloads of some concrete, some building supplies. You build the house. You put in some plumbing. You put in all the kitchen cupboards and all the rest of it. You have a really nice house. But it's a house. You can live there, kinda. Bring in a sleeping bag, lie on the floor. But it's not a home. What happens when you move in? You bring your furniture in, you hang pictures on the wall, you put carpets on the floor. You move in. You live there. You take residence in it. You make it comfy and you make it a home. That's the transition. In Genesis, you've got 6 days of the temple, the grand cosmic temple being made. On the 7th day, God moves in. It goes from being a house to a home. And Yahweh moves in, takes up residence in it, and starts to be the king in residence in his palace temple. And in Hebrew, palace and temple are the same word. So that begins to give a sense of Yahweh's perspective on rest. Rest is, he is the king. And he's in his cosmic temple. And in the tabernacle and in Solomon's temple, we see his presence. In Jesus, we see him physically embodied, walking on earth. And in us, living temples. The Holy Spirit dwells within us. God rests in us, as it were. If we are Holy Spirit people, then God is in residence in us. He has taken up rest within us to rule our lives. We are to give him charge over our lives. So what about our perspective on rest? It's all the same kind of word used. 1 Kings chapter 5. You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. I intend therefore to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David, when he said, your son whom I will put on the throne in your place will build a temple for my name. Do you begin to catch the vision? Rest from our perspective is when we live in an ordered world. And here we live in this incredible tension, which is the text is implying that the Lord my God has given me rest on every side and there is no adversary or disaster. So Yahweh is involved in the ordering process. But David was active in that. Solomon is active in that, in asking for wisdom. So it's kind of like God is involved in the ordering and has done a good job of that because David and Solomon have been engaged in that same process. The two are so interlinked. And this kind of concept of order Well, don't we know it today? You know, we're living in a chaotic age. Australia's mega bushfires last year, COVID crisis this year. And to some extent, that's our doing as humanity. With climate change and the way we've abused the planet, well, we're reaping chaos that we've sown. The world is unordered, not any fault of Yahweh's. It's because we haven't been engaged in rightly reflecting his character in the world. It's complex. It's really complex. We work to his plans, and together we order. So then let's skip ahead, 1,000 years to Jesus. Why does Jesus bait the Pharisees? Because Sabbath is not about stopping work. It's deeper, richer than that. Rest is a fundamental theology that we've just no idea about. Who is God but Yahweh? And what does it mean to care for the image bearers? Notice how many times what Jesus is doing that really annoys them on Sabbath is healing. And their attitude is, well, you could heal on Sunday, remembering Sabbath is Saturday. So why don't you put it off a day? Jesus' attitude is, why should I? Why can't I do it today? Why can't I care for people on the Sabbath? The rules weren't made first. It wasn't rules and then humanity made so that the rules could apply to somebody. People were made and encouraged to reflect Yahweh's character. But that's a bit nebulous, so we need some framework about what Yahweh's character is like. So there are rules, there are laws that are trying to teach us about his character. And taking rest, acknowledging that we're not in control, is an important component of that. So then let's flip back to, my yoke is easy and I will give you rest. What kind of rest is Jesus talking about? So often that implies putting your feet up and doing nothing. How many sermons have you heard like that? No. I really am beginning to think that's not the vision. I think the vision goes something like this. You are not God. You do not carry the world on your shoulders. The Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, they carry the world on their shoulders. They're the ones upholding the world, sustaining it, maintaining it, speaking into it, speaking into the lives of every single human being who has ever lived, speaking words of courage and encouragement, of learning into their ears that they may follow them. Stunning vision, really. We don't always listen. We have to prove that we understand that we don't carry the world. And that means stepping back from an attitude of control. Stepping back and taking time off from our labours, which are all about control. Taking the risk that work won't get done. But we have work. You know, if you go and read, read the temple texts from Solomon's day, it's funny. You know, Solomon starts with, Yahweh's given them rest so that the temple may be built. They have this massive party to celebrate the temple, the coming of the Lord into the temple. And they all go back to their farmlands to farm. Still got to produce food. Still got to make money and sustain life. Doesn't happen without work. Do justice. Care for people. Care for the temple creation. It all takes effort. So the yoke is easy because we don't carry the burden of what happens with our work. We just do the work in front of us and leave that existential stuff, the future stuff, to Yahweh. I think if we can live into a richer sense that God is at work in the world, He is at work through us, and we can leave our heavy burdens with Him and work with joy and passion and leave it there. I think that's rest. And so we come to the end of Session 6 on rest. In our next sessions, we deal with two ideas that may seem less linked than gods, temples, images of gods, sacrifice, and rest, where the gods rest in the temples. And, you know, probably something to do with Sabbath and rest, and Jesus is, I left this out, but it just struck me that part of the resting in temples and the Sabbath conundrum in the text is, well, Jesus is Yahweh in the temple, resting. So you can see that it's all multiple ideas circling. But next week we deal with seas and mountains, which are two funny kind of concepts that are richly embedded in our biblical text. Actually from the first chapter to almost the last chapter of the Bible. So, that's all, folks.